Wednesday, my dudes. I'm only kidding. The final 53-man roster, ladies and gentlemen, is in the books. And we're going to kind of look at this roster up and down. But some key figures have been cut that we thought would be able to make the roster that didn't. Guys like Eli Ricks, guys like Anaya Smith. I thought a guy like Kyle McCord would end up making the roster considering that they drafted him. But those are some of the casualties that we saw on this 53-man roster get sliced and diced so that Philadelphia could enter the 2025 season with the most confidence they can in their current roster. Now, we saw a couple of moves that they made in the past few days, trading for Fred Johnson, bringing in Sam Howell, and other pieces like that to help solidify some of the depth on the roster. And some of the moves that they have made can kind of give you an indication on what type of direction that this team wants to go towards in the 2025 season. Also, we may look at how this roster has been allocated, the roster spots, rather, have been allocated, and some of the emphasis that they have on this team, and it might give you a little bit more insight on potential future assets that they may go after, maybe future players that we hear in the rumor mill regarding the Philadelphia Eagles, particularly at edge, because there are two names out there that we're going to be talking about in just a little bit in Jalen Phillips and Travon Walker from the Jacksonville Jaguars, who have been popular in the talks of the Philadelphia rumor mill in regards to Howie Roseman going after them via trade. I'm also going to talk about some free agents who are available at the moment at cornerback, particularly Stephon Gilmore, and maybe even Asante Samuel Jr., who I believe can help make an impact at the corner 2 spot, considering the fact that we had to bring in a guy like Jacorian Bennett because Keely Ringo hasn't worked out, and we brought in Adoree Jackson with the offsetting of Darius Slay for a little bit less money. Again, doesn't really look like a promising position at the moment, but again, we'll look at this roster up and down and talk about that in just a few moments. But before we do that, we introduce the show. This is the Riding the Bench Eagles podcast. I'm your host, Asif Badi, and like you, I am a Birds fan who talks about the Birds, only the Birds, and nothing but the Philadelphia Eagles. So please do us a favor here, help this channel grow organically and be part of the discussion by subscribing to the channel below. Hit the thumbs up button and comment your thoughts in the comments section and give me your perspective. Also, check us out on audio platforms such as Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and leave a 5-star review, because in the end, I am not asking for a penny from any of you. The last thing I need to do is go into your pockets and ask you to give me money. Save a couple of bucks, but help a brother out. Do the right thing. Subscribe, like, share, and we thank you for your support on the opposite side of the camera and on the opposite side of the airwaves. Without further ado, let's talk about this roster and some of the cuts that they made, okay? I'm going to share my screen here for the audio audience. I'm going to just highlight a couple of names that I thought would make the roster, but unfortunately have not. Some key figures here. You look at Kenyon Green, the offensive guard that we decided to let go, and obviously we traded Chauncey Gardner-Johnson for this guy, and this guy's not making the roster, which just makes that Chauncey Gardner-Johnson trade that much more of a head-scratcher. But again, it seems to be that the guy was a headache in terms of dealing with him in the locker room, which I don't know what you want me to say about that. I thought it was a mistake. At the time, I'm like, okay, they have a plan here. They're thinking about the future. They may be looking at drafting a safety, and they ended up doing that with Andrew Mukuba, and they hoped that he could fill in those shoes. But it's really tough to replace an attitude player and a tone setter in the locker room like Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, albeit a player who is a little bit of a headache in terms of his temperament. But I'll be damned if I want to play football on the NFL level. And again, I'm not a player, so to speak. I'm just speaking from the fact that I've played football in the past and been in a locker room before. You don't want no damn choir boys in every single level of the roster. You need some guys who are going to punch you in the mouth and are going to call out your bullshit when you have bullshit play. Chauncey Gardner-Johnson was one of those players who was not afraid to yap with the best of them. And on the field, while he was a little undisciplined, was a playmaker. And it's really, really tough to replace that kind of level of playmaking, especially on a defense like this. And we're going to be relying on guys like Sidney Brown and Andrew Makuba to come step up and play for Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. Tough gig. But I say all that because we cut Kenyon Green, the guy who we traded Chauncey Gardner-Johnson for. How ironic. E.J. Jenkins was another name that a lot of people liked in Philadelphia, considering the battle at tight end. Again, he just, look, catching the ball at tight end is pretty fundamental. You need to be able to do that. And if you're dropping passes, That's no bueno. We don't like to see that. Kyle McCord was another name that I thought would make the roster here. But when you trade for Sam Howell and you have Tanner McKee, tough to keep a fourth quarterback. That's Kyle McCord. And it's not like he played excellent in the preseason games by any means, but Howie drafted him, and I thought he would make the roster just despite of that, right? An interesting name, though, is Eli Ricks. Eli Ricks, the quarterback, did not make the roster. Now, we are carrying, 6 cornerbacks on the roster at the moment. You obviously have Quinyon Mitchell, Cooper DeJean. You have Adoree Jackson and Keely Ringo. And then the other 2 guys are Jacorian Bennett, who we just traded from the Raiders. And lastly, Mac McWilliams, a guy we drafted to play the slot corner. Now, he's had a pretty decent camp, and he's turning eyeballs. And maybe, just maybe, later on in the season, he might be useful for us and make impact plays. Right now, though, Eli Ricks being waived after so many years of making the roster, tough sledding for him. I'm sure a team's going to pick him up because he's had too many moments in preseason football over the past couple of years. And he is a player on the Eagles. After all, when you cut guys on the Philadelphia Eagles roster, other teams are going to notice and are going to take a stab at some of these players because, listen, the reality is when you cut a player from the Philadelphia Eagles versus cutting a player from the New York Jets, it's apples to oranges here. One, you're dealing with chicken shit, and the other one, you're dealing with some, a quality piece of chicken. And I don't mean that to be insulting. That's just the analogy that came to my head. So forgive me for anybody offended. If you are offended, then please just, lighten up. Okay, again, probably the biggest name for me that I thought would make the roster here, at least as a punt returner, was Ainias Smith. Now, he didn't make the roster. He had a tough camp last season. We're carrying, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 receivers on the roster now with A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, Jahan Dotson, obviously Darius Cooper, who had a really, really good preseason and camp. And then lastly, we traded for John Mechie not too long ago, the former second-round pick. Again, tough sledding for Ainias Smith, who, again, had a better offseason this year. He had a better preseason. Unfortunately, just did not have enough roster spots to make this 53-man roster. And those cuts are significant enough because now we're going to kind of take a look at the breakdown of some of the roster spot allocations on this roster, okay? So, obviously, we're holding 3 quarterbacks. That's no surprise there. Running backs are pretty much self-explanatory. We know we were keeping Ben Van Sumeren because we want to run fullback. The wide receiver room, like I mentioned before, is John Mechie, Darius Cooper, and obviously the big 3 that we all know and love. Tight end, I'm surprised we kept the 3rd tight end, but Kylan Granson made the roster. Grant Calcaterra, Dallas Goedert. Offensive line, we have 11 offensive linemen, which is pretty remarkable. Jordan Mailata, Dickerson, Jurgenstein, and Lane Johnson, obviously the big 5 right there. We brought back Fred Johnson from the Jacksonville Jaguars with a 7th-round trade pick. Matt Pryor, who we signed in the offseason, again, a swing tackle and guard. And then we have Drew Kendall, who played really well in the preseason. Obviously, they weren't going to cut Trevor Keegan. I thought he was good enough to make the roster. I like the player. Cameron Williams and Brett Toth are the guys who are going to round about the depth on this roster. Now, some of the players that they ended up letting go in waivers, I'm sure are going to probably a good chunk of them are going to make the practice squad. So again, just because they didn't make the 53-man roster doesn't mean that some of these players will not get to the practice squad. Okay, so a lot of the cuts and a lot of the players that they decide to let go, Philadelphia believes that they can make the practice squad and believe that other teams are not going to be able to sign them in the upcoming few weeks before the regular season begins. Defensive tackle is pretty obvious. We knew the big three in Davis, Carter, Ojomo, Ty Robinson. We just drafted Byron Young and Gabe Hall round out the defensive tackle room. We knew Nolan Smith, Jalex Hunt, Uche, and Azeez Ojulari were going to make a room. We're going to make the team. But Agbo Okoronwo, forgive me if I pronounce this name wrong again. I'm pretty sensitive with names, so forgive me for the mispronunciation. But rounding out the edge room, again, something that we're going to talk about in just a moment. Linebackers, we knew the big four in Munden, Campbell, Bond, Trotter. We knew these guys. This is probably the best linebacker core that we've had. Plus, we have Nakobe Dean on the PUP list, who is going to miss, 4 or 5 weeks? When you're on the PUP list after some time, you don't count against the 53-man roster. You just have to miss at least 4 to 5 games, which Nakobe Dean is going to have to do. And then cornerback. We have 6 cornerbacks on the roster we talked about before. Safety room is Blankenship, Brown, Makuba, and Tristan McCullum, who we knew. And then Jake Elliott and Brandon Mann round out the 53-man roster. So those are the 53 roster spots for the Philadelphia Eagles. But if you notice, having a many offensive linemen and 11 defensive linemen, including the edge and defensive tackle room, kind of gives you an idea of hey, we're building through the trenches. Typical Philadelphia, typical mantra that they have, right? Build through the trenches, win through the trenches. That's the way you build a football team. And which now brings me to my last point here, okay? So now that you have an idea who the 53-man roster is and what it looks like, where exactly is Philadelphia going to be going now? Because it doesn't seem like Howie Roseman is necessarily done with making acquisitions to this roster, okay? He has a lot of draft capital, and he has a lot of, I guess, what's the word I'm looking for? He is prone to be very mobile in terms of moving players on the roster because he's thinking longer term. And I think he's had a quote in the past where he's talked about, it's easy for me to find depth on a roster. Very easy. I could find guys who could play second and third string up and down the roster very easily. It's finding quality starters that's the problem. Once you have a quality starter, building depth is easy. Okay? And I don't disagree with him, number one, because I think that's just valid. But it's interesting that he says that because if you look at some of the signings that we've had in the offseason, we're doing a lot of very cheap, low-risk signings, one-year deals, mercenary-type deals for players who are not necessarily wowing you in terms of their play or even name value. We're going after depth for a lot of these players, and I think they anticipated some of the younger guys on the roster would step up and be a little bit more quality than what they are. Guys like Keely Ringo, guys like Sidney Brown, guys like Adoree Jackson, right? Unfortunately, though, those guys have not necessarily panned out, and they've had to rely on some younger players who are coming in via the draft. Now, those are always going to be question marks, and because you have so many question marks on this defense right now in terms of the depth and who you're going to do and who you're going to use to replace some key players that we lost last season, ironically, and I guess really not ironically, but in an apropos way, Philadelphia is in the trade market, in the news cycle for trades, right? And that seems to be what it is with Philadelphia. Every single offseason, every single player is on the market for Philadelphia. So let's take a look at what the bleedinggreennation.com says about Philadelphia making a move. 2 names that I am hearing to keep an eye on. Again, this is just an article on Bleeding Green Nation by Brandon Lee Gowden, and this is talk that's been kind of simmering and floating around Philadelphia right now. Travon Walker and Jalen Phillips. Walker was the first overall pick in 2022. Jaguars picked up his 5th-year option and he signed to 2026. Has had back-to-back double-digit sack seasons, putting up 10 and 10.5 season ago. Philadelphia would have to make a trade, obviously. They would probably give up a first-round pick to make it happen. And if that's the case, it would be expected to do that and make another deep playoff push. That pick would be closer to the 2nd round anyway. The Jaguars don't have a first-round pick next year after trading it away to land Travis Hunter in the 2025 draft. So The Eagles would include Keely Ringo, one of the third-round picks that they're expected to have next spring, and then a sweetener might be a fourth in 2027. And because Travon Walker's salary is very low at $11.8 million and $15 million next season, Travon Walker seems like an attractive pick. Okay, so what's the incentive for the Jacksonville Jaguars to trade Travon Walker? Is he the number one? Has he played like the number one overall pick? No, I wouldn't say that, but he's certainly not a scrub. And I don't think just dangling a first-round pick for the guy, let alone trading Keely Ringo, along with draft picks that are going to be so high in the draft. I mean, like, listen, respect to Jacksonville. I guess no disrespect to Jacksonville. They are miles away from being a good football team at the moment. I personally think they made a mistake with Travis Hunter, but that's neither here nor there. That's another conversation. You traded many assets to get a player like Travis Hunter, and now you're left next year when you're probably going to stink again with no first-round pick. So Philadelphia is going to throw out a first-round pick to them. And listen, if we believe in Philadelphia the way we all do, we at the absolute worst believe Philadelphia is going to finish at least pick 24, pick 25 in next year's draft. Like, we're going to be a playoff team. We're going to probably make a decent run if we have the number one seed, number one. But maybe we win a playoff game. Who knows? We don't know yet. We got to see how the games play out. But at the very least, we're going to be in the 20s. Does Jacksonville really want to have a first-round pick in the 20s? Keely Ringo, a third-round pick and like a fifth-round pick in a couple of years for Travon Walker, who's probably one of their more productive players on the roster outside of Josh Allen? No, of course not. I think you have to throw in a few more picks. You got to throw a first. You probably got to throw a second, maybe even a third, plus a player, honestly, in order to bring Travon Walker into the mix. And quite frankly, I don't think Philadelphia is in a position where they want to give up players in the edge room to bring in a star or a budding star edge player. Because if you get rid of a guy like Jay Alexander, you get rid of a guy like Nolan Smith, plus draft capital, you still run into the same problem that you have right now, where you have an unknown at edge in your system, right, with Travon Walker. And again, he has the athleticism to play in the scheme. But now all of a sudden you have to integrate him into a defense. You lose depth in the edge room, which is one of the big problems on the roster, particularly in the edge room. So you lose your depth there. You bring in a star player, and then in a couple of years where you have to start paying some of your star defensive guys, you have to consider paying this guy $30+ million. So now, again, I know what you guys are thinking. You're saying, hey, who better than Howie Roseman to have this problem? And I agree with you. First world problems in terms of football land. Totally get it. However, does that seem like a move Howie Roseman is really going to want to make? Do they really want to give away a first-round pick for a player like that? I'm not 100% sure. I know we're in the rumor mill for this, and he's from the University of Georgia. I get it, and that plays a part in this, I'm sure. I just think Howie Roseman might go for a little bit more of a conservative move at this point. Remember, all the moves that they have made this offseason, everything that they have done has been made to set up for next offseason so that they can go out and pay some of their better players on the defensive side of the ball. Any move that compromises that, any move that says, hey, I'm going to sacrifice a little bit of the future in order to sustain the now, at least based on the moves they've made this offseason, not necessarily the case, ladies and gentlemen, at least in my opinion. I don't see them going out trading for Travon Walker. If anything, I think they may go after a player like Jalen Phillips, who's seen Vic before, who's played in his scheme before in Miami. Again, a guy's coming off injury, so Miami, again, a train wreck franchise, probably are looking to offload some of these guys. You could throw in a third-round pick for him, maybe even maybe just a second-round pick or something like that, something that's a little bit less, again, something that's not a first-round pick, to go after an edge player who you can bring in, who's athletic enough to drop back into coverage, can play the run, and is a really good pass rusher in Jalen Phillips. Now, again, he's coming off an injury, so we don't know what type of production you're going to get from him, but if he's part of your rotation and he adds a little bit more depth to the roster, it's certainly a quality asset to have. And again, I think a third-round pick would probably do it, in all honesty. And if that's all it takes, that might be worth a swing, as opposed to trading a first, a second, and a third for Travon Walker plus a player, right? A little bit more of an easier pill to swallow, in my opinion, but that's neither here nor there. Point being is, that's part of the trade rumor mill in Philadelphia right now. Maybe we are looking to get an edge player, as a lot of beat reporters are talking about. And again, if that's the case, then you know what? We are in a much better position than I thought, because I came into this season believing that, hey, Philadelphia, whatever they do in this 2025 season is gravy. They won the Super Bowl last season. All their moves have indicated that they're preparing for the 2026 offseason, where they have to pay Jalen Carter and all these other guys on the back end of the roster, on the defensive side of the ball. So anything that they do this season is gravy. They brought in most of their offensive starters. You bring in a good chunk of your defensive core back, and you add some key pieces via the draft. And if you somehow land a quality edge guy, or if you bring in a guy like Stephon Gilmore, a former defensive player of the year, to help sustain your quarterback position, or you maybe make a move to get another player on the back end, all of a sudden the roster seems to round out a little bit more. You have more depth, and all the draft picks that you've accumulated over the past 2-3 seasons can now be used to get better, more quality assets. So that's probably going to be the thing that I think people are going to key in on with Philadelphia. What is Howie's next move? What is the big trade, or what is the big transaction that Howie Roseman feels like he's going to make? Because everyone in Philadelphia believes that there's something coming down the pike. It's just a matter of what and how big that what is going to be. I personally don't know if we're going to get Travon Walker, but that seems to be the name that's buzzing around. I think we go more along the lines of a Jalen Phillips personally, or maybe pick up another free agent after some of these roster cuts get truly finalized and we know who's making the waiver wire and whatnot. I feel like that's the route that Howie Roseman is going to go towards, because again, it's all about the money, ladies and gentlemen. And in the 2025 season, no matter what we say, no matter what it looks like, I think Philadelphia's primary objective outside of winning football games week to week is to save a few dollars in Jeffrey Lurie's pocket so that he can be better prepared to pay big money in the 2026 offseason.
Hey, thank you so much for watching the Riding the Bench Eagles podcast. If you want to continue to support the channel, please hit the like and subscribe button down below. Also, check us out on Instagram and TikTok at Riding the Bench Eagles Pod. We're also on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, you name it, we're on there. Thank you so much for listening, and please join us next time here at the Riding the Bench Eagles Podcast.